So welcome to the first of 9 sessions that we'll be hosting for our Civics and Citizenship Professional Learning Program. Ninamani, I am on Kaurna land at the moment at Parliament House, and I acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land that I'm on here at Parliament House. And it would be great if you're joining us from around the state to drop into the chat the country that you're on, so we can see everybody acknowledging the country that they're on at the moment. As familiar faces each week, I thought that I would introduce myself and a couple of other colleagues who will be working with us over the course of this program. So I'm Natalie Young, or Natalie Badcock now, the Education Manager at Parliament House, and I will be taking care of administration for these sessions for you. We also have Aaron Harrison from the Department for Education and Emma Houghton from the Commissioner for Children and Young People's Office, and we'll be working with you each week to facilitate this program. In terms of communications and certificates, I will be following up with you after this session. I'm also monitoring attendance so I can keep records for your professional learning hours. Can you please make sure that your name in this session reflects the name that you have registered with so I can monitor attendance? And so with that administrative content out of the way, I will pass it over to Aaron Harrison, who will introduce you to the session that we've got happening today, and will also introduce Her Excellency, the Governor. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie, and good afternoon, everybody. It's fantastic to meet everybody online, albeit. So yeah, my name's Aaron Harrison. I'm Manager of Community Projects at the Department for Education. And as part of my role, I look after a number of projects and awards that offer the opportunity to South Australian students to engage in learning and experience around the HASS learning area of the curriculum. The Governor's Civics Awards for Schools has been running since 2019 and is open to South Australian students from Year 5 to SACE across all sectors of education to develop student awareness and skills as active and informed citizens in a multicultural and democratic society. Later on in the workshop, I'll provide more details about the awards, including where you can find information about the categories and the criteria and how to apply. Before I hand over to our special guests today, I would like to acknowledge her official secretary, Hugh Borman, who is also joining us online today. How are we going, Natalie?
I can see Her Excellency, so I will pin the video, and we hopefully have good connectivity and we'll be able to go.
Yeah, great. All right. Before we do, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to ask some questions, albeit we've had a bit of a late start after we hear from Her Excellency. So we have had some questions already sent to us, but if any come up, please pop them in the chat line, and Natalie will be making notes of these as well. However, for now, we have a great privilege for this first workshop, so to kick off this series of workshops, to hear from Her Excellency, the Honourable Frances Adamson, the Governor of South Australia, in a session about the role of the Governor. Her Excellency is very keen to continue to connect and engage with schools, and we're very, very honoured to have her here this afternoon as our guest, especially as she is very likely to be very jet lagged and tired after a whirlwind trip to London, which I'm sure many of you will be following. And I'd also imagine it would have been an incredible experience representing our state. So welcome, Your Excellency, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much indeed, Aaron. And can I just check, because we've had to make some backup arrangements here, that you can hear me all right?
Sounds perfect.
Great. All right. Well, look, let me start in the way I normally would every time I speak anywhere on a Kaurna country, and that's with an acknowledgement of country in Kaurna language. And I'll just use a shortened version now. Kaurna bogana alia, Kaurna miana alia, yaichi miana alia, kumatana yartananku. I acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to the elders. And if we had a number of Kaurna and other people in the room, I would be addressing them by name and welcoming Aboriginal people from other lands and regions. So let me just do that in English. But it's a great pleasure to join you today. I have, or did last night, fly in from London, where I'd been attending the coronation. And I suppose that actually that experience made me think even more deeply about the role of Governor and about some of the things that we'll be talking about today. Now, I'm very keen, because in my experience, the most important part of these occasions is the Q&A part, the part where I can actually respond to what's on your mind. So what I was hoping to do is give a slightly truncated version of what I might otherwise have said, and in the hope that that will elicit questions to which I can then provide helpful answers. But I really wanted to start out by thanking you all for your interest in teaching civics. I've had an opportunity to meet a number, going through various programs, a number of teachers, a number of students hoping to become teachers of civics. And I've come to realise, I suppose, the very important role that you all play. And I've also come to a realisation that I must say I would not have had until relatively recently. And that is, if I were to put 2 only compulsory subjects on the school curriculum, I think they would be civics and also financial literacy, because they are really the 2 things that I think that prepare you for life, prepare you to engage in our democracy as an informed, active citizen, and also running one's financial affairs, no matter how modest they are, can be pretty challenging in this day and age. And I think they're 2 things that can give our students a good start. And I know a number of you come at this from different perspectives. You're dialing in from all sorts of schools with different interests in this. Some of them with program curriculum time, some not. So what I'm really hoping to do, and I won't just seek to persuade you gently, I'll try and persuade you very directly, is I really would like you to feel by the end of this session that you've got a better sense of the role of governor, perhaps a sense of me personally too, because I think that's quite important. Rod, my husband, and I very much want Government House to be a house for all South Australians, house and garden for all South Australians, not just the South Australians whose life chances might, from the very beginning, perhaps create an expectation that they might walk through the state entrance here one day. So I'm very keen to engage directly with students, so is Rod. But let me explain a little bit about my role, and in the hope, at least I'm very open to ways in which we might work together. And I'm very grateful for Aaron taking over where Malcolm McInerney left off when it comes to the Governor's Awards for Civics in Schools, which are just part of what we do, but nevertheless a part on which I rely heavily on him and on you all for encouraging interest, I suppose. Every proclamation day on the 28th of December, I read, as all of my predecessors have, and I'm the 36th Governor of South Australia, I read out the original proclamation read by Governor Hindmarsh on that day. And I really see that as a call to action. It's for the pioneers and their successors, and I'm a 6th generation South Australian, but it's really for all of us to prove ourselves worthy, I think, to be the people who continue what was founded as a great and free colony. So it was a call to action for them. I actually still think in the 21st century, it's something of a call to action for us too. Now, governors typically have 3 roles, and I'll come to talk about those in a minute. They're the constitutional, ceremonial, and community roles. But we're also encouraged, and it's a wonderful thing actually about taking on this role. If you ever get the chance, possibly when you're a bit older, to do it, I'd strongly encourage you to take it. But my key areas of focus are, I've got 6 of them, which is a bit too many if you're going to focus on things, but I couldn't leave any of them out. The first one is leadership, and that obviously overlaps in some areas with the second one, which is civics and schools. The third one is supporting South Australia's international engagement. The fourth one is gender equality, and I really want to be a governor who expects gender equality, not just who supports gender equality. The fifth one is supporting reconciliation in ways which are appropriate for a governor. There are obviously limitations. Governors don't get involved in policy or politics, but we can help set a tone. We can provide encouragement. We have the power to bring people together, convening power, if you like, and certainly listening can be a very powerful thing too. And the sixth one is support for South Australian business, including some of our iconic companies. They provide employment. We all, I think, need a sense of who they are, and I'm very happy to support them as well too. Now, specifically on those 3 Cs and on my term, governors in South Australia are typically appointed for a 5-year term. We're appointed by the King now on advice from the Premier, and that decision in South Australia is almost invariably, I think, a decision of the Premier in Cabinet. The constitutional element of the role is really to safeguard the Constitution. Sometimes I'll describe myself, but only in limited circumstances where people will understand, as a very little c, little u constitutional umpire, not someone who rushes around blowing a whistle and handing out red and yellow cards. Obviously, I'm using a soccer analogy rather than an AFL one. But someone who can just have a quiet chat with people just to make sure that everything's staying on track, which of course it mostly does, but occasionally the odd word of encouragement, the odd question, the odd warning can just keep things on track. So it's safeguarding the Constitution, smooth transition of government, usually very straightforward in South Australia. The Premier of the day normally knows pretty early on in the evening whether he or she so far is to be re-elected, and then the transfer happens as it did last time very smoothly. Also, I swear in ministers. I give through meetings of Executive Council, which I preside over every Thursday morning, what is called royal assent to bills, so that they become acts of Parliament. I make proclamations, as I will again tomorrow, enabling that legislation to enter into force. I appoint judges, I make regulations, all, of course, on the advice of and with the consent of Executive Council. Those decisions, just in case you're wondering, and many of you will know this, but they are all listed the same day in the Government Gazette. So by Thursday afternoon, they're available online. The ceremonial part of the role, good examples are opening of Parliament, investitures, Anzac Day, Proclamation Day. There are a number of them, and I've got a reasonably large wardrobe of what I would call dress-ups upstairs. The community role is something I love and spend quite a lot of time on. It's meeting citizens around the state, acknowledging their achievements, their service, their innovation, whatever it might be. And we have, as you probably know, many of you probably volunteers yourselves, many of you, but there's an enormous amount contributed by people giving their time to other people, to activities, to endeavours which improve the lives and livelihoods of people in our state. I'm patron to about 160 organisations, many of them not-for-profits, charitable organisations and others. I also write congratulatory letters to people reaching the grand old age of 100, lots of those as our population ages. And I also write to congratulate people on 50, 60, even 70 years of marriage. And of course, Government House is used every day by members of the public. Now, I always have trouble looking at the Zoom camera and reading what's popping up on the screen, but yes, we do run tours for schools. I saw someone asking, and we do, hang on, I've just got someone coming in to do something technical. I'm still going. Yeah. Good. Excellent. No, that's all right. I mentioned the Gazette. Much more interesting to your students and possibly even to you is the fact that I've got a reasonably active social media presence on Instagram at Governor South Australia and on Facebook. And really, if you look at those posts over the last 18 months or so, or even just over the last couple of weeks, you'll get a good sense of the breadth of what the Governor does and my role, the role of my governors across Australia in our democracy and in our civic life. Of course, I always act on the advice of the government of the day. There are reserve powers used in extremis only, and I would obviously seek and receive legal advice if I were even considering doing something like, well, I mean, it's barely even worth mentioning sacking a minister, only in limited and extreme circumstances. Also worth mentioning, when I'm travelling within the state, interstate or overseas, I do very little interstate travel, but I do travel overseas to promote South Australia's interest. The Lieutenant Governor is appointed as what is called Governor's Deputy, and he effectively fulfills the role of Administrator of the state while I'm away. Now, one of the things I'm very keen to sort of enlist your help to do really is to try and encourage in young South Australians, who I typically find to be very sort of forward-looking, creative, active, wanting to do things, wanting to fix things that might not be right to their eyes, you know, ultimately, in effect, sort of wanting to lead or to make a difference, even though the language they use might be slightly different. But I want to encourage an appreciation of the privileges and the responsibilities that come from being a citizen in our democracy. So that's where you come in, I think, and it's where I actually think it's not a question of making everything a teaching from scratch, if you like. I think the interest is there. What many students lack is actually just the knowledge about how our system works, what the role of an MP is, how to make a change. And I know that someone's asked a question about what changes have I seen, what have I seen students doing. A really good example, one that I often quote, is actually young people just realising that this term Strangers Gallery over in Parliament House to describe the group of people who are not elected MPs who might want to come and listen was actually quite off-putting, and the suggestion that be changed to the People's Gallery was accepted in standing orders. It's a much more welcoming name. It's a small example, but it goes right to the heart of where things are done, and traditions that young people, I think, over the ages have always questioned. So a questioning mind is obviously worth encouraging, engendering pride in our history, knowledge of our history, our traditions of fairness, of democracy and social innovation. So I know Aaron mentioned the Governor's Awards for Civics. Entries close in September. The Education Department's website's got quite a lot of details about the individual, group and school categories and what's required. What would make me happy beyond measure almost is if we could have a more diverse range of schools participating from all three sectors, from all parts of the state. And as I say, there's an open invitation for Rod and me, or for me if it's depending on the nature of the event. Rod's a former teacher, by the way, maths and physics, but he's got a very, very strong commitment to education and to engaging with students. So we're available to help you do the job that I hope you'll be very willing to do, not just for your schools and your students, but for our state. Could I also encourage you, and please encourage your students, to come to our open day on the Sunday, the 21st of May, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. We'll actually be sort of majoring this time on the coronation. I've brought back a few items of interest from that, which we're very willing to share with everyone who visits that day. So I'm going to stop there and very happy to move straight into questions for anyone who wants to ask them. Thank you. I'll go into mute.
You probably won't be on mute too long, because we do have a couple of questions that have come in. One was from Joel and Laura, and the question is, does Her Excellency take school excursions at Government House?
Yes, and I did see that flash up on the screen, and I think I answered it, and the answer is, of course, an enthusiastic yes. We have guides who take groups around, and I'll be very open with you in saying at the moment that I'm just looking to adjust the model a bit so that when it comes to school groups, we're able to get your feedback and a clear indication of what you're actually looking for when you come, so that we can ensure we've got guides who will, if you like, engage with the students and really nail what it is that you're hoping and they're hoping to gain from the visit. So an enthusiastic yes to that. Many days of the school year we have school groups in here, and when I am here and available, it's not always the case because I can be doing things in other parts of the house or elsewhere in the state, but I'm very happy to just have a brief chat with students as well.
Yeah, terrific. And I know speaking to Hugh this morning, he said for interested teachers just to contact Government House and arrange a time. And I know we've got Natalie here from SA Parliament. It might be a really good double excursion to visit Parliament House and if possible, visit Government House on the same day, while, especially for country schools, getting more bang for the buck with your excursions into this precinct.
Can I just add, we do work very closely together. Government House and Parliament House, we are neighbours, well, across the road neighbours, but we do work very closely together, and we're always flexible, I think, about how those double visits can be arranged.
All right, terrific, thank you. Next question. This one's a question that came in previously. What is the key message you'd like teachers to take away about your role and pass on to your students? So you may have touched on that a little bit as you were talking.
Look, I think I did try to touch on it because I was anticipating the question, but I think it's really a sense of enthusiasm for the knowledge that will come from the work that they'll do as part of the civics. Well, I'm calling it the civics course. I know for some of you there'll be a focus on history, however you choose to teach it. And enthusiasm for that, ideally a love of it, and a sense that they want to come here and visit, that they want to, it's not, there's a lot of history in this house, but there is a lot of the present. And what we try to present increasingly is what goes on here now that is of relevance and interest to the students. And obviously, to the extent that it's possible, I'd love students and I'd love you to have a bit of a sense of who I am and how we might work together to achieve this larger objective.
Oh, excellent, thank you. And just a question on the future of your role. Do you see it remaining the same, or do you think it will evolve into something different?
Look, that's an interesting question, and let me answer it in sort of good faith, if you like, but really just for you rather than for repeating. I think the role has been seen over now 36 governors to be remarkably durable. Now, leaving aside our constitutional arrangements, and of course you can't actually leave them aside, but having read the book Vice Regal by Philip Payton, published just before I was sworn in as a governor. In fact, I had an opportunity to read it while I was in quarantine for 2 weeks before the swearing in. But that gave me a really sort of deep sense that South Australians over many governors have had something close to an affection for governors. They want us to succeed because they know we're working on their behalf. And there've been a number of firsts in South Australia in that regard. Dame Roma Mitchell, the first female governor of any state in Australia. We've also had the first Aboriginal governor, Sir Doug Nicholls, who had a number of other firsts himself as well. Marjorie Jackson Nelson, of course, an Olympic gold medal winning athlete. We've had Sir Eric Neal as a businessman, a rear admiral in Kevin Scarce, a Vietnamese boat person in Hugh Van Lay. I mean, he was many things more than that, but that's what he was when he arrived in Australia. I think I'm probably the first diplomat, not that that really counts as a first, but I think there is a sense of the personal there, and the role has, in essence, its essential features of it remain unchanged. But of course, the power of governor, if you like, once one would almost say all powerful, and there's evidence of that for historians who look for it, now acting formally only on the advice of and with the consent of Executive Council. But as you would know, there are many ways to offer leadership, and that can go to tone and the encouragement that people need to receive. It can go to where you spend your time, how you do what you do. I do, though, think whatever one's views about the future of the monarchy in Australia, whether or not we should become a republic, I do think there is a role for someone, governor or governor-like, to do those formal things and indeed the community role that is done differently by politicians. I do think it's a useful thing that ministers know after they've passed legislation, after they've made regulations, after the government has put forward a appointment, they know it's useful for them to know that someone is going to read all of that carefully, that someone is going to ask questions if there are questions to be asked before that final formal approval of whatever bit of process it is. I do think that that is a valuable thing. I think one would be wise to be open-minded about how it's given effect to in the future. But I have to also add, and it's a little bit hard, I think I was, if not the only South Australian in Westminster Abbey on Saturday. I had an opportunity for a brief chat to the King, not a formal audience, obviously, but in the course of a reception at Buckingham Palace on Friday afternoon, and I was at that amazing concert at Windsor Castle on Sunday. I do think that the King conveys his own deep sense of service. He's got, some people might be surprised to hear this, but he's got a lot of energy. He's got a very strong commitment to inclusion, to bettering the lives of people who are doing it tough, as we would say here, and an incredibly strong desire to save endangered species, to take steps to ensure environmental sustainability. I think his whole life has been committed to that. And it was very interesting for me to see the UK system, the Commonwealth, and indeed global leaders gather around that and if you like, be very supportive of it, because his role and that of working members of the royal family, that of the realms, and Australia, of course, is a realm, one of those countries which has still the King as head of state, even though we have our own Governor-General who represents us for all intents and purposes overseas and acts as a head of state in all important respects. And governors, while we have no sort of formal foreign responsibilities at the national level, representing our state overseas, as I mentioned, is a part of my role, and one that obviously as a former diplomat I relish. I think we've got a couple of minutes left if there are any other questions. Thank you.
I just had one, Natalie passed me, and I think you have touched on a little bit about what was expected of your role for the coronation. And maybe tell us a little bit, I'm sure there's a bit of curiosity about your experience and what went into your preparation and why you were there.
Okay, well, look, I mean, let me just be very clear. All the hard work was done by the Brits. No hard work really required by guests, but I did ensure, as I always do when I go overseas, that I'd had a briefing from the state government, that I was fully up on the Premier's priorities in his economic statement, fully briefed on the renewables agenda, on the defence state agenda, on a range of other things, so that I could give a good account of that when opportunities arose. It was really the coronation itself in Westminster Abbey, a deeply solemn at one level, religious ceremony, which has been conducted in its core elements largely unchanged in Westminster Abbey for close to 1,000 years. At the same time, though, it's a celebration, and for anyone who tuned in or worked their way through the 50-page order of service, as I did, you would have very much got that sense. I've served as an Australian diplomat in the United Kingdom. I've attended a number of events at Westminster Abbey, a number of services, 200 years since the abolition of slavery, the service for a former British Prime Minister, Anzac Days, a whole Remembrance Day, a whole range of things. But this was at an altogether different level in terms of the quality of the music, in terms of the deep thought that had gone into. And when I talk about inclusion, I mean the first time that Welsh had been used in the ceremony, those who sang. I was going to say perform, but that's not really the right word for Westminster Abbey, obviously came from a wide variety of backgrounds, invitations very different from 1953 when the Queen was crowned, to a much wider variety of people, including, one might say, ordinary Brits. Very strong representation really from across the globe. I think 100 countries were represented. Prime ministers, presidents, members of royal families, governors general, state governors, governors of British dependent territories, as they remain in some instances rather than realms, and a whole range of people from absolutely every walk of life, all coming together to witness a very, very special occasion, not just because it's been 70 years since the last one was held, but there'll be a number of you who will take an interest in it, who will understand the religious significance and the state significance and the musical significance. The music was absolutely wonderful. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, by the way, was in South Australia not so long ago, and who came here to Government House, and I had an opportunity to speak to him. The way he conducted the service was very inclusive as well. So apart from that, the only thing that was slightly onerous, I'll be very frank with you, was the need to prepare a wardrobe which goes beyond that which I would normally wear, if I can put it that way. But again, have a look at my Instagram and Facebook at Governor South Australia, and you'll see elements of what I did, what I saw, what I experienced. But I do feel slightly as if I've been somewhere very different for there to be now. It's all about King Charles and Queen Camilla. And that takes a little bit of getting used to, as does, of course, singing God Save the King. So let me leave it there.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I understand you have another commitment you have to get to. So we really, really appreciate you giving up your time to, again, connect and engage with teachers and educators, and obviously your passion and energy, like you mentioned, of our King towards South Australia and our young students, and supporting them in their development of civics and citizenship is really appreciated from us as well. We look forward to continuing to work with you, and I will, once you depart in a moment, share with the teachers where they can go and register and find out more information about the Governor's Award as well.
Thanks very much, Aaron. And look, if it was possible for me to meet all 1.7 million South Australians in a 5-year term, I'd do it. I'd like to get close, though. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. What I might do now, just for the next 5 minutes or so, is just quickly go through some of the places you can visit to find out more about the Governor's Civics Awards for schools. Just, I'm not sure if you can give a thumbs up if your school's been involved in the past on the chat line. I'll get my chat back up.
I haven't seen any, but I also don't know if that's whether or not the hand gestures are working.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. I'll keep going anyway.
I can see a couple.
Got a couple? Oh, yes. Now they're popping up. So some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have heard of it before. As I mentioned at the start, it's been running since 2019 with our previous governor, got it up and running. and now Her Excellency is very, very keen to continue it and build on it and make sure the awards are more accessible for the whole state. It is available for not just Department for Education schools, it goes across all sectors. So we're talking obviously Department for Education, Catholic Education, and the independent sectors. It is strongly aligned to the Australian curriculum, so the history and civics and citizenship of the Australian curriculum. This year's entries must be received by Friday, 15th of September at 5 p.m. So there's still quite a bit of time to get your head around what's involved and enter. There are a number of categories that schools and students can enter. So there is individual categories. So there's an individual awards for each of year 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. And then there's between 8 and 10 SACE students that are awarded. There's also group entries for primary and secondary groups. So there's 2 awards there. And there's school entries. So there's primary and secondary school entries as well. In terms of what is on offer, those that are successful are presented by the government herself at ceremonies at either under the old gum tree at Glenelg Proclamation Day on December 28th, or a ceremony at Government House in the new year as well. So we sort of split that up a little bit. There are cash prizes up for grabs for the school entries. And obviously it's a fairly high profile award to win as well. So Natalie has the website, which we might drop into the chat, Natalie, if you're still
I'll
there.
bring it up on screen for you as well, so everybody can see.
Yes, so so we'll leave the web address in the chat. There are supporting resources. This is where the applications can be downloaded. There are questions and answers. There are examples of winners in the past, and there's a short video from 2022, so not too long ago, that talks about it. And it's got curriculum links as we're getting through now, and conditions and categories are part of the support materials as well. All right, so I'll be the main contact. So there's a email address down the bottom. I think it's in several areas of the page. So if you do like to know more about the awards after you have a bit of a look at it, there it is, governorscivicsawards.sa.gov.au. That'll reach me. You can ask me questions. I'm actually doing a specific teacher professional development workshop as part of this series, and I haven't got the date on me at the moment. I'm sure Natalie might be able to find it in a moment, or Emma. But we're inviting some of the previously successful schools, so teachers from them, to actually share their experiences with the award and give some advice and tips for schools who are thinking about going for it this year. So that'll be quite a worthwhile one to be part of as well, especially with the tips and tricks and advice that they can provide as well. So that's just part of this series of professional development online workshops.
Okay, and Aaron, may I ask a question? What are some of the student actions that have received Civics Awards in the past?
Some of the entries have been multimedia, so that's acceptable. I think Her Excellency touched on a school award last year. So, and I know you're very aware of this, Natalie and Emma, that I think it was Prospect Primary School, visited Parliament House and saw the gallery's name was the Strangers Gallery. And one of our MPs actually visited that school and had some discussion, and feedback was then given as part of a project to change the name. It's now called the Guest Gallery, Natalie?
The public gallery, they've changed it, yeah.
Public Gallery, which is a much friendlier way. So they've demonstrated positive change in the community. So there's lots of different examples. And if anyone is interested in finding out some of those examples, give me a call and I can share them as well.
Okay, were there any questions that were unaddressed from the governor's session, or did you need further elaboration on any of the content that has come up tonight that we can provide you with support with?
And sorry, Emma's just said the seminar on the awards, the professional development on the awards will be from 4 to 5 p.m. on 28th of June. So in a few weeks' time, but certainly worth attending.
Okay, well, I haven't seen any further questions come up in the chat, but I will remind you that the excursions to Government House can be nicely linked with other city destinations, and Her Excellency is really enthusiastic about receiving visitors. She's very passionate about the civics education space, and she would be very receptive to coming to visit your school sites as well if she is in the area. So keeping a good open communication with Government House would be well received by them, and potentially really beneficial for your students to feel like they've been heard by our vice-regal representative. She's quite a remarkable governor. I don't think that, you know, for 70 years there's been anyone who's had the opportunity to have the same kind of connection and experience that she has had with our reigning monarch. So there would be some really great opportunities for you to explore that experience with your students. She might also have some really interesting perspectives on reconciliation practices in light of South Australia's voice to Parliament and what's happening at the federal level. She did mention that in her priorities, having a reconciliation strategy and approach that's befitting of a governor is really critical, and she might be really interested in talking to your students about her work in that space. I can see Joel has a question. You might need to unmute yourself, Joel, so I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for the information. I just have a quick question in regards to the school excursions. We got directed to contact our Member of Parliament, Katrine. Sorry for Raynell.
Yes.
We're just having a lot of difficulties lining up dates for them to take the tour. Can we actually book directly with Parliament House and with the governess?
So the Government House would manage their own booking process separately, and they would coordinate that for you. As a hot tip, Parliament is the more difficult destination to book into because tours are hosted by your Member of Parliament. So all tours of Parliament House are covered by the local MP who represents the area where your school is. So the Electoral Commission of South Australia has a searchable map. Type in your address, and obviously you're familiar that it's Katrine for Raynell.
Yeah.
With a Member of Parliament who is also a minister, it can be a particular challenge trying to pin down their time. So my hot tip is that we have 22 members of the Legislative Council who represent the whole state, and all of them can be approached to host you for a school tour. And there is a bigger selection of party membership in there. We've got 2 Greens members, 2 SA Best, Sarah Game for One Nation, as well as Liberal and Labor members who are not with ministerial portfolios. So you can continue your line of query with the Raynell Electorate Office, and I'm sure they'll do the best that they can to support you. But you are also very welcome to approach members of the Upper House of Parliament, who would be a really interesting tour host for your students, because they speak with a state-based focus rather than a single electorate focus. The reason why we don't have specific bookings at Parliament directly is that we don't have the staff. So myself and my colleague Edgar, who's not online at the moment, we're the only people here. So we can't facilitate the sheer number in the course of a day, but it's really essential in our view for students to have access to their elected representatives, to put a face to the concept of representative democracy. So similar to the way that the power of meeting Her Excellency herself passes on the message of her representation element, same is having a local Member of Parliament being the voice and face for your students. So hopefully that supports you a little bit. Keep pursuing Raynell, but if not, Member of the Legislative Council.
That's great. Thank you for your advice and your feedback. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. And I can see in the chat that someone said who would be the guide, as previously the local MP would take you through. It would still be your local MP. And for those of you in regional and remote areas, if they're not available, their office will often work really hard to come up with a solution for you. Usually it will be myself who would support a regional or remote school, because I never want anyone to miss out. But you also have the opportunity to approach a member of the Legislative Council as well. Were there any further questions on the role of Her Excellency? Yep, one new message. Do students address the governor as Your Excellency? So the protocol is that when you meet the governor for the first time, you call her Your Excellency or Her Excellency, and then subsequent references can be slightly more informal. So I believe they say you can call her the governor, or is it madam? I'm not sure what she would prefer, but there is a protocol list on her website. I will say that the governor at the moment is a very warm and lovely person, and she will not be judging any of your students if they call her Ms. Adamson or refer to her in another way. But you begin by saying Your Excellency, and there are protocol charts on the governor's website, which I can drop into the chat for you. So that way you can see how you address the governor. So I'll just put that into the chat for you now. It can be mom afterwards. There you go. So not madam, but mom. There you go. Were there any further questions? I'll just give the chat a moment to catch up. I've just dropped the protocols in there. If there aren't any further questions, I'll do some administrative matters to round up tonight's session before we move along. So if you have further questions, you're welcome to put them in, but I'll keep talking in the meantime. So next week, we have the Commissioner for Children and Young People, Helen Connolly, who will be joining us. And Helen is incredibly passionate about civics and citizenship education. And she'll be talking about civics education with her hat as the, voice and the communicator for many young people in South Australia. And I believe she might have some new materials to show us as well, but I don't want to anticipate it. I'll let her reveal her bag of tricks in the next session. So if you're not registered for that one, I highly recommend it. There will be some very practical resources, I think, that will support you in your teaching. And I've dropped the link earlier in the chat to register for future sessions. What will happen after tonight's session is that I've recorded your attendance and you'll receive a certificate from me that you can print and add your name to. And I will also share a OneDrive folder with you that grants you access to the recording of this session and relevant resources. So that would include materials about the Governor's Civics Awards for schools. And I can also include a list of links for booking excursions at the different destinations. If you came in late, or if you had colleagues who missed the session, or someone who signed up that you know of who didn't attend, they will also receive an email, but it will offer them the opportunity to watch the session afterwards, and I can monitor who's viewed the session and provide certificates retrospectively. So if you need to follow up what the governor said, you can check that in the recording, or if someone's missed out, they can have access to it as well. Now, I just wanted to see if there were any further questions that came in while I was talking. I don't think there were. So hopefully you feel inspired having listened to Her Excellency. She's a wonderful advocate for South Australia and someone who's really eager to be an asset for your teaching and learning. The Governor's Civics Awards for schools has a huge amount of content and teaching opportunities available to you, including incorporating some of the award questions into a class activity. So please look at that. And if you have any follow-up questions that you think of after the fact, you're welcome to contact education@parliament.sa.gov.au. So with all of that in mind, I hope you enjoyed our very significant keynote speaker for our kickoff session, to be only followed up by an equally amazing speaker next week in the form of the Commissioner. So have a lovely evening, everybody, and we will hopefully see many of you next week or over the next several weeks. Thank you. Okay. Good evening. I'm going to end the session now. So if you're booted out, I'm not trying to get rid of you, more that the session's cutting us all off. Thank you.